Our lawyers want you to know that when you attend any of our webinars or watch any of our movies, you're agreeing to the terms of service located at the link on the screen. We're also required to provide this abbreviation of what our terms of service include. The main point we need to get across is that regulations change on a regular basis, and we want you to know that what we present can sometimes be very time-dated information or our own interpretation of new guidance or regulations. The materials we present today are subject to change. Also, whenever we provide free boilerplates as part of our webinars or movies, we're required to point out our transfer of copyright agreement, which is also located on our website, in our IT resources library. You can read it by going to the link on the screen. Please also note, by attending an infotex webinar or by receiving any infotex movie, you may be added to our mailing list. We apologize if you'd rather not receive notice of other free education. You can always opt out at the link on the screen.
Hi, I'm Adam Reynolds, and I'm the lead non-technical auditor here at Infotex. And I'm really happy to be here today. I will be presenting what the ACET seems to be, or how the typical SIEM helps credit unions comply with the NCUA's Automated Cybersecurity Examination Tool. First, I'd like to go through a couple disclosures before we start today. We are a managed security service provider, and a lot of what we're going to be talking about today really relates to what we do for our clients. And so it's important that you realize there are a number of other legitimate players in this space, and while they should agree with most of what we're saying in general, they may take a different approach towards offering services that might get you to the same destination, but aren't exactly the same as ours. And so because we only know our SIEM, well, we've analyzed other SIEMs, we've seen them in action, but we can only really speak in detail to ours. What we've decided to do today is tell you what our SIEM does as it's related to the Automated Cybersecurity Examination Tool, or ACET. And that may take a little translation if you're looking at another SIEM besides infotex. But in most cases, to be compliant with a particular statement, it will require you to do something on your end. And so we're going to talk about where your monitored security service provider covers particular ACET statements. All right, now that we have the disclosures out of the way, what we want to talk about next is how the SIEM that Infotex provides has helped credit unions, comply with the Automated Cybersecurity Examination Tool. So we'll start that off by talking about the ACET itself, and then talk about the SIEM and statements we help you cover. And in discussing the ACET, if you've gone through the tool, this information should look familiar, but it consists of two parts: the inherent risk profile and the maturity level. We of course start off with an inherent risk assessment so we can determine how mature we should be. And there are 5 different levels of maturity, as well as 5 different levels of inherent risk. Just to mention, working with a lot of smaller institutions, we see most of our clients falling into the minimal inherent risk category. And so you think as long as you're at baseline, you're okay. But what we want you to realize is that you still probably have a little bit of work left. And then eventually your examiners might be getting around to asking you why you're not at evolving. Just so you you can start moving towards evolving at any point in time. Specifically, the areas where you are outsourcing to a managed security service provider. But I would start laying a paper trail to answer that question now. Why aren't you at evolving? And of course, there could be good reasons. But the sooner you're ready to answer that question, especially before an examiner asks, the better position you're in to defend against possible compliance objectives from moving above baseline. So let's talk about our tool. And I'll let you know what I mean by our tool here in a minute. But the ACET was developed in 2017. And it mirrors the FFIEC's Cybersecurity Assessment Tool, which I'll talk about a little bit more here in a minute. But in 2018, the NCUA began using the ACET to assess credit union cybersecurity maturity. They began the assessments for credit unions with assets of $1 billion or greater in 2018, followed by institutions with assets between $1 billion and $250 million in 2019. And in 2020, the NCUA continued completing these assessments for credit unions with assets over 250 million and began completing assessments for credit unions with assets over 100 million. The initial maturity assessment cycle is supposed to be finished in 2021. So then starting in 2022, the agency will refresh the maturity assessments following the same asset size schedule just discussed, resulting in a refresh cycle of once in every 4 years. And as I had mentioned, the ACET mirrored the CAT, which is again is the FFIEC's cybersecurity assessment tool. It uses the same maturity levels, inherent risk levels, the same exact statements. I believe out of all of the statements, there was one where the language was slightly changed, but the intent was the same. So in 2015, when the CAT came out, and this is where our tool comes into play, we created our tool, our own tool to analyze the CAT. And what we did is looked at every maturity level statement by statement instead of at a component level. And the reason we did that was because we wanted to lay a paper trail that allowed us to prioritize mitigation based on our own perceived risks. And we wanted to do that at the statement level rather than at the component level. And the tool really not only gave us the ability to then manage mitigation at the statement level, but it also gave us the ability to analyze a cybersecurity assessment tool, which really ended up resulting in this webinar because when we analyzed the tool, the cybersecurity assessment tool originally in 2015, when we analyzed the maturity statements, we started realizing that we actually contribute as a managed security service provider to the compliance of a lot of statements that smaller community-based banks way back in 2015, then at least were not in compliance with. And those same exact statements translate directly to the ACET for credit unions. So we've been working with these statements as an MSSP since 2015. And now the framework is being used for smaller credit unions. And we're going to discuss exactly what statements from the ACET we help with as an MSSP. So what you're looking at now is our spreadsheet tool. It analyzes statements in the ACET where our SIEM helps in some way. And I'll be coming back to explain this in more detail shortly, but these are numbered as they appear in the ACET by domain, factor, component, and then of course the statement. Let's first filter down to the baseline statements. That's where our focus will be today. And we currently have a number of hidden columns. Let me unhide those real quick. And of course, there we go. So what this shows you is that, of course, every statement is going to tie back to a component, a factor, and then a particular domain. And the main thing to know here is that in order to be in compliance with the oversight component of the governance factor in the first domain, you need to have all of these statements in order to be at baseline. There are 5 statements in this example. Most of our clients are now at baseline, but it's taken a number of years to get there. And you can't say you are at baseline until they met every statement in the oversight component. Every statement and every component of every factor in all 5 domains. And we have really been able to reduce that burden as a managed security service provider by helping, in some way with a lot of these statements. So let me just rehide those columns real quick because that's really reduces it down to what we're going to be showing here today. And what that is how we, as a managed security service provider, can assist you in particular statements to meet different levels of maturity. Again, baseline is what we'll be focusing on here today, but I will be discussing how we can help, do help, and cover various statements. So back to analyzing the statements. Now don't forget, most of this still requires cooperation from the credit union's technical team. So just remember, something I want to make sure you realize is that there is a mutual reliance whenever a SIEM is involved. In other words, the way infotex defines this, we say a SIEM is that which facilitates the mutual reliance between 3 teams in a credit union. So I hope you understand what we mean. And it's basically that, if we say we can help with a particular ACET statement, it doesn't necessarily mean we're doing all of the work. But what we've done when we analyze the assessment tool from, what does an MSSP do perspective first, there's a whole bunch of statements we simply don't help with. And I'll talk to you, about those, here in a minute. And then there's a whole lot of statements that we or a typical managed security service provider can help with. But most of these are in the area of audit work or boilerplates. We do offer a lot of boilerplates to our managed security service clients and that sort of thing. So while we can help with these statements, it's not necessarily part of our contract, and it's not necessarily part of a typical MSSP contract. But know that if you're not working with infotex as your MSSP, they can probably help with the statements that we're saying we can help with. And then there are the statements that we do help with. In other words, if you're engaged with us and we're actually, actively helping with this particular statement, even though we're not really responsible for it. We still plug into the process, and I'll explain what I mean when we get into the analysis as well. And then finally, there are those statements where if you've engaged with us for a full SIEM, meaning that we're doing IPS, IDS, event log management, or change detection, we're running all of those different sources, all of those inputs through the database, which most people call the SIEM, but we really don't refer to the database as the SIEM. More the overall process is what we refer to as our security information and event management system. But there are, many statements that we actually cover, and we'll talk about those as well when we need to make sure that we remember is that we define, 3 statements. Ones we can help with, ones we do help with, and ones we cover. But that is only with the help of our clients. All right, now we're going to move on to the SIEM. But let's kind of talk about the SIEM now and how we got here. So what happened back in 2015 when the CAT was released? 2016 running through it, 2017 everybody was starting to understand the process, and we ended up drawing a security monitoring architecture like this that basically establishes that your managed security service provider, through the use of IDS, IPS, event log management, change detection, etc. There's a lot of ACET statements we're really helping to cure. A lot of these statements, if you look at what the tech team in a financial institution was doing, before they engaged with their managed security service provider, they weren't getting many of the ACET statements correct. Like if you look at it, it's a little hard to see, but there's 7 statements outside the bubbles of managed services and IDS, IPS. So there's 7 baseline statements secured by what we're already doing, whereas, there's a whole bunch of baseline statements that were cured by, the managed security service provider. So we're taking a look at the spreadsheet again, and first of all, if you'll notice, well, hopefully everybody can see this, but there's a number of statements throughout here where there's going to be nothing to the right of the actual statement, something we can't help with. Designated members of management are held accountable by the board or an appropriate board committee, etc. We really can't help there as a managed security service provider at all, and that's what the board does. They're responsible for that. So we're not going to be able to help at all, but if we do filter down, these are just the ones in the we can help column. You'll see our SIEM can help with a whole number of statements just in, domain 1. Let's take a look at number 31 here. The institution has policies commensurate with its risk and complexity that addresses the concept of incident response and resilience. Well, how does Infotex help with that? If you're a client of Infotex, we actually provide all of our boilerplates to you at no cost, so we can help with that. We can help by providing templates for policies you may need. So there's a whole lot of statements like that where it's just our boilerplates that make it. So an item where you have to engage with us, where we have to work together, is what we mean by do help. So let me go ahead and filter down to that column. And here's a great example. There's really only one statement in the first domain, cyber risk management and oversight, where we do help. Organizational assets are prioritized for protection based on the data classification and business value. That's something you've got to do. We don't do it for you. But during our tuning period, we're actually helping you create a paper trail as to what you're not going to be watching. You're using an organizational asset prioritization method. And so most of our clients, when we're completing this process, see how this is fulfilling that statement. And if they have not previously addressed that item, they can take that to their auditors to fulfill the requirement for that statement. So we do help with that. It's still mostly your work, right? But you still have to tell us which assets, you want to watch, which ones you don't, etc. And we help you with the prioritization by doing a little network criticality analysis. And, just so your examiners, your auditors might want you to go above and beyond what we're helping you do. But we do help with that particular statement. I like going down into the fourth or fifth domain because we have a number of incident response stuff there. So let's find a good example. 432. Scenarios are used to improve incident response detection. And a lot of people are trying to interpret, what does that mean? And what we're basically saying is that, many of our clients use us to facilitate incident response testing. We actually include that in a lot of our managed security engagements. And the main reason why is because we've learned over the years the best way to prepare your team, not only reactively, but of course, preventatively, is to do an incident response test. We feel like that really opens management's eyes and, that sort of thing. So, again, while you still do the work, we're not actually doing the test, but we can facilitate the test. We also have a lot of boilerplates surrounding incident response testing, if you want to go ahead and facilitate your own test, of course. But our point is that we do help with that by nature of us being engaged with our clients. So let's go ahead and unfilter that column now. And the we cover column is really where the value of working with an MSSP like infotex is. It's that you're able to cover a whole bunch of threat management type statements. A lot of the monitoring statements, of course, and even some of the vendor management and incident response statements just by being engaged with your managed security service provider. In fact, there are 34 ACET statements we covered just by being your MSSP. So let's take a look at a couple. Computer event logs are used for investigations once an event has occurred. As an MSSP, if there is ever an investigation called for, we can provide those computer event logs. Security controls are designed and verified to detect and prevent intrusion from third-party connections. Our SIEM can put a watch on third parties and also watch for unauthorized access. Alert parameters are set for detecting information security incidents that prompt mitigating action. A lot of our answers to these is just, this is what our SIEM does. This is what a SIEM does. All ports are monitored. We do that, if we're providing change detection. We're scanning your ports on a periodic basis, all depending on whether you set that up daily, weekly, monthly, etc. And then we're providing a report to you of any ports that have changed since the last time the report was run, right? Well, while we cover that for you, you still have to receive that report. You have to understand that report. You have to acknowledge changes as expected or not. Request more information about a port if needed. The point being is, even though we cover this, which is the category where we are doing the most work compared to the others, you're still involved in the process because the SIEM is, as I mentioned before, an intersection of three teams, of mutual reliance of those three teams: the tech team, your managed security service provider, and your incident response team, all working together to protect you. So that should hopefully help you understand how we, as an MSSP, can help you based on three different levels of help, or involvement really, to meet particular ACET statements. But it's always a process involving those three teams. And again, infotex covers 34 statements just by being your MSSP, and does help, or can help, with a lot more. So that brings me to the end of this presentation. If you'd like this information, please shoot us an email and we'd be happy to provide that. Similarly, of course, if you have any other questions about services we offer or anything else, please let us know and we'd be happy to get back to you. And with that, thank you for joining me and watching this movie from Infotex.